for a few moments, and the help of the Holy Spirit, I want to preach from this thought: on the road, not the route. That's a beautiful graphic. On the road, not the route. Last week, we began the long walk by asking a difficult question: who gave you your map? We talked about the trauma, we talked about the maps we inherit from family, faith, culture, education, trauma, ambition, expectation. The maps that tell us who we are supposed to be, where we are supposed to go, and what life is supposed to look like when we get there. Every road, but sooner or later, every map meets a moment it cannot explain. Because sooner or later, every map reaches a crossroads. And crossroads are complicated places. Because a crossroad is not simply where two roads meet. A crossroad is where what has been comes face to face with what could be. There are moments in life when the road you have been traveling suddenly presents you with a decision. Sometimes you choose the crossroad. You decide to go back to school. You decide to start the business. You decide to leave the role or the job. You decide you want something different for your life. But sometimes you don't choose the crossroads. The crossroads choose you. Or life's, as they say. A marriage ends. Someone you love deeply transitions and dies. A diagnosis shocks your system. Your child grows up and next week they will leave for college and you are afraid to be in an empty nest. The company restructures and suddenly the job you thought was secure is gone. Friendship breakups, I think, sometimes are worse than romantic breakups. Or your body changes and you can't figure out why. Or for some of us in this place, your belief system altogether begins to change. You wake up one morning and realize the vision of you that got you here cannot carry you where you are trying to go. And suddenly you're standing at the intersection of what was and what can be. And that is what makes crossroads on the long walk so unsettling. The difficulty is not simply deciding which direction to take. The difficulty is realizing that staying exactly where you were will not serve you in the long run. Because when it comes to crossroads, something has shifted. The terrain changes under your feet. The life you knew may still exist in your memory, but it no longer exists in quite the same way beneath your feet. And I need you to hear me clearly this morning. You can be on a road and still not be on the route. A road tells you where life has brought you. A route requires direction. The road may explain how you got here, but the route answers a different question. Where do you go from here? And the question becomes even more complicated when you arrive at the crossroads. Here it is, carrying grief, disappointment, disruption, and loss. Because grief, my friends, has a voice. Fear has a loud voice. Memory has a voice. And just like the GPS you may have used to get to church this morning, there are competing voices trying to tell you where to turn, when to stop, when to go back, and which road to take next. Hear me clearly. What happened to you has a voice. And if you are not careful, the loudest voice at the crossroads will become your guide. So perhaps the question this morning is not simply which way are you going? Perhaps the deeper question is, when you arrive at the crossroads carrying grief, who gets to give you direction? Because by the time we meet Abram in Genesis chapter 12, he is already on the road and grief has been his passenger. Most of us know Abram's story in Genesis 12. We know this. It's one we've heard. Our faith is based off of it in so many ways. The Lord said to Abram, go. But starting Abram's story in Genesis 12 causes you to miss what he's carrying on the road when God called him by name. Because Abram's journey doesn't begin in Genesis chapter 12. Everybody sees you on your chapter 12, but I want to know who knows about your chapter 11. Because Genesis 11 introduces Abram's family. There is Terah, his father. Terah has 3 sons, Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran has a son named Lot. And the Bible tells us that Abram meets Sarai, and before there's any talk about promised lands or great nations or blessings or descendants as numerous as the stars, hear me, tragedy strikes this family. Haran, a son, dies, full stop. A son is gone. It's out of order. Children are supposed to bury their parents. Parents aren't supposed to bury their children. And the text makes a point of telling us that Haran dies in the presence of his father in the land of his birth, which means before Terah even gets on the road, he has already buried a son. Before Abram ever hear God say, go, hear me, he has buried a brother, because we don't talk about sibling loss. And before Lot ever becomes Abram's traveling companion, he has buried his father. This is the gravity of this is a grieving family. Terah, Haran's father, he is grieving. Abram, Haran's brother, is grieving. Lot, Haran's son, is grieving. And somewhere after the loss, Genesis chapter 11, verse 31 tells us Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot. We don't know what happened to the other son, because grief can tear a family apart, and his daughter-in-law Sarah, and together they set out from Ur of the Chaldeans, and they are headed to Canaan. They had a destination. They're going somewhere. They're moving. They were on the road despite the loss. They were on the road despite the loss, but the text says, hear me go, when they came to Haran, they settled there. While the Bible does not tell us why Terah settled in Haran, I, as a pastor, am a student of human nature, and you may not know this about me, but I love to people watch. I love to study people, their actions, their decisions, how they process. And after years of pastoring people through death, divorce, disappointment, disruption, and loss, I know enough about grief to at least ask the question, what happens when people carrying loss arrive at a crossroads? Because sometimes grief might make you move. I also know that sometimes grief can make you stop in your tracks. Sometimes grief makes you reach for something new, and sometimes grief makes you hold tighter to whatever you have left because you have already lost more than you can bear. And here is what stopped me in my tracks this week. Haran, the place, not to be confused with Haran, Tetra's son who had died, was not just some random place along the way. Its ancient name is also associated, if you translate it in the Hebrew, the name means road, journey. One translator says crossroads. And because of its geographical location, Haran became an important place of rest along major trade routes connecting the ancient world. Terah and his family are headed towards Canaan, but they arrive at a crossroads. Here it is, and they settle there. Hear me, beloved, there is nothing inherently wrong with stopping. Stopping, hear me, is holy. Resting, I know Reverend Gina, is also holy because you deserve to sit down long enough to catch your breath. You are entitled to stop long enough to grieve what you lost before you even imagine what comes next. You are encouraged to give yourself permission to regain sure footing after life dropped you off on shaky ground. But there is a difference between stopping on the journey and settling before the journey is finished. Stopping says, I need a minute. Settling says, this is as far as I'm going. Stopping creates space to heal, but settling can turn a pit stop into a destination. And Genesis does not tell us why, but this is where Terah's journey ends. Genesis 11 closes by telling us that Terah died in Haran. And now Abram is left to pick up the broken pieces. Hear me, it's another loss for Abram. It's another disruption. It's another crossroads. Abram has now lost a brother and a father. And yet, when Genesis 12 opens, something extraordinary happens in the aftermath of everything that has been lost. Here it is. God speaks. And somehow, after everything Abram has been through, hear me, lean in, Abram is still able to listen. What you mean still able? Because sometimes grief turns God off or out. It's not intentional. It's not on purpose, but you just can't hear like you used to hear. You just can't connect like you used to connect. But Abram is still able to listen. And in the aftermath of everything that has been lost, he listens. And beloved, I don't want us to move past this moment too quickly, because there is something happening between the end of Genesis 11 and the beginning of Genesis 12 that I had never really given much thought until now. Genesis 11 says, Terah took Abram. Genesis 12 says, God called Abram. Oh, it's a subtle shift. It's in the quiet, it's in the space. You thought you were moving on to the next chapter, but in that space where your chapter 11 ends and your chapter 12 begins, there's a space by which you were called by your father in your chapter 11, but now called by God in your chapter 12. And up until this point, Abram has been traveling within his father's discernment. We gonna set somebody free. His father started this journey. His father decided they were leaving his father chose Canaan as a destination, and it was his father's household that gave the structure of his life for him to be able to stand under the shadow of his father and trust his father's discernment. Terah took Abram as far as Terah's journey would take him, Haran. But now Terah is gone. And Abram has arrived at a crossroads where his father can no longer tell him what to do next. Let me say it for somebody to hear it. The person that you used to rely on to help you discern, the person you used to trust for counsel and wisdom is no longer there. They have taken you as far as they can on the journey, and Abram has arrived at a crossroads. And he now has to hear God for himself. And beloved, there comes a point on the long walk when nobody else can hear the next instructions for you. You've got to hear them for yourself. Mama can't hear it for you this time. Daddy can't hear it for you this time. Grandma can't hear it for you this time. Your pastor can't hear it for you this time. Therapy matters, but your therapist can't hear it for you. Your best friend knows you, but your friends can't hear it for you. These folks who love you can pray with you. They can counsel you. They might be able to help you discern, but sometimes your people can confirm what you're sensing, or they can remind you of who you were when grief had made you forget, but eventually you have to hear God for yourself. And let me pause to the person who's saying, I don't know how to hear from God, but try just a little bit. Trust just a little bit. If God can't trust you with a small word, how's God going to trust you with a full sentence? Because intimacy cannot be outsourced, full stop. And sometimes disruption has a strange way of changing what we were able to hear, and now it's gone silent. Let me be clear, I'm not suggesting that God let Terah die so Abram could hear God better. That would be cheap theology. I don't believe God has to destroy your life in order to direct it. But I have lived long enough to know that God does not have to cause the disruption to speak through the opening it creates. Sometimes what once organized or oriented your life disappears. The relationship that helped you locate yourself is gone. The position that gave you identity is eliminated. The person whose voice you trusted has faded into the Alzheimer's diagnosis. The certainty you leaned on is nowhere to be found, and suddenly there is a silence where something dependable used to be. And silence will make you ask questions that stability never required of you. Who am I now? Emphasis on the now. What do I believe now? What matters to me now? Because as you get older in life, what mattered when you were younger don't matter so much when you get older. But some of us in our old age hold on to things that really don't matter and suck the life out of the room trying to control it. I don't know where that came from. How can I even begin to move forward? And eventually, if you can get quiet enough to whisper into the quiet moments of your soul, I have done this, God, what are you saying to me now? Because this is what I have discovered on my own long walk with God. Sometimes disruption, grief, and loss have caused me to tune myself more intently to the sound of God's voice. Not because I wanted what happened, not because I would have chosen what happened, not because what happened was good, but because once it happened, I needed to know, where do I go from here? And sometimes we are so busy asking God for an explanation of what happened that we miss God giving us direction for what happens next, because you don't need an explanation in order to receive direction. Let me say that again. You don't need an explanation. I know you want an explanation, but you don't need an explanation in order to receive a direction. We keep asking why, and God may be answering this way. We want an explanation. God offers us an orientation. You keep staring at the road that brought you here. God keeps trying to orient you towards the route from here. And here's what we can learn. Abram is willing to listen. Let me pause. If you're doing all the talking, then you can't be doing all the listening. But brace yourself, because what God says next, hear me, when you start to read it as a grief narrative, right? Not just, because everybody loves, he about to be famous and great and blessed and cursed. No. Let's look at what brought him here. Brace yourself, because what God says next almost feels offensive to somebody who has already lost so much. Because after everything Abram has already had to let go of and lose, here it is. God says, leave it again. And not just leave anything. God tells him to leave what is still familiar. Leave your country. Leave your family. And leave your father's home, not for 221 Canaan Street. Leave it for a land I will show you. And I need us to hear those words differently, because we know something about Abram that we didn't know when we first opened Genesis 12. Hear me, Abram is grieving. He knows what it feels like for somebody you love to be here one day and gone the next. He knows what it feels like to watch the shape of your family change. He knows what it feels like to look around and realize there are people who used to be part of your everyday life who are now only accessible through memory. His brother is gone. His father is gone. And now we add something else to the text, quietly holding us, because I came for my seasoned saints today. Abram is 75. 75. He's not young. He's not forming. He's not some young person who thinks they know everything. He's not experimenting at 75, baby. He is established. He is set. He is seasoned. A man who's with lived experience in his bones. A man who learned how life works. A man who had built rhythms and routines and a sense of stability around what he knows. And at 75, you don't just have memories, baby. You got patterns. You got ways you do things in this house. You have ways of doing things that have carried you through the decades. You have a life that has already been shaped by what has worked, what has failed, what has hurt, and what has healed. And at 75, change doesn't just feel inconvenient, it feels costly. Because at 75, you are not just leaving places, you're leaving certainty. And God says, leave. Leave again. Say goodbye again. Walk away from something familiar again. At an age when most people are trying to preserve what remains, God is asking Abram to release what he already knows. And beloved, I need to sit right there for a minute, because sometimes after you've lost enough, familiarity starts to feel like safety. I know I'm preaching in here today. You may not even love where you are. You may know that this is not where you are supposed to stay. You may feel something inside you pulling you towards more, but at least you know this place, you know these people, you know these streets, you know this house, you know this version of yourself. You know how to survive here. And after life has already taken things from you that you did not volunteer to give up, there is something almost unbearable about choosing to release anything else. Because grief has a way of making you hold on and hold on tightly. Not always because you're holding on because it's good for you. Sometimes you hold on because you cannot bear the thought of losing one more thing. I've already said goodbye enough. I've already started over a number of times. I've already had to figure out who I am without somebody I thought would always be there. I've already rebuilt. I've already learned how to sleep in an empty bed. I've already walked into the house knowing the voice isn't going to answer. I've already watched the dream I prayed for become the thing I had to bury. And now you want me to leave something else for God? At 75, after all I've lived, after all I've learned, after all I've survived, that's the emotional weight of the text. Because sometimes resistance isn't rebellion. Sometimes resistance is grief trying to protect you from more grief. I know I'm preaching in here today. Take a breath. I know it's a lot. I'm trying to help you. And yet, listen to what God asked Abram to leave. He says, leave your country. Leave your kinfolk. Leave your father's house. And in Abram's world, these weren't simply places and people. Hear me, because I don't care what your age is. They're coordinates. His country told him where he belongs. His kindred told him who his people were. His father's house gave him lineage, identity, inheritance, security. In other words, God is saying, leave what locates you. I don't know if they make Polish boys anywhere else in the world, but when somebody says something about a Polish boy, you say Cleveland. It orients you. It's coordinates. And that's what makes the crossroads worth fighting for. Because sometimes God is calling you forward after decades of being anchored in a place that you know better than you know yourself, after you have learned how to live life a certain kind of way, after you have built identity around what is stable, known, and predictable, after you have finally reached an age where you thought the journey would slow down, and still God says, go. Not because what you're leaving was bad. Hear me, this is so important. Let me help somebody, because I've had to learn that some things do not have to be bad or go bad for you to be finished with them. Can I pause and help you? Sometimes the reason why you fighting is because God told you to leave 3 seasons ago, but you holding on to that thing, and so now God must make it uncomfortable. Watch this, because you didn't want to have an uncomfortable conversation. Abram doesn't have to make Haran a terrible place in order for Haran to no longer be his place. I hope you are hearing me, because then when we don't leave when we're supposed to leave, then we vilify the place we left. He doesn't have to reject his father in order to go further than his father went. He doesn't have to despise his inheritance in order to discern which part of it belongs in his future, and neither do you. Some of us have spent years believing that moving forward somehow dishonors what came before. I'm about to help you today, but moving forward is not betrayal. Becoming is not betrayal. Healing is not betrayal. Laughing again is not betrayal. Loving again is not betrayal. Dreaming again is not betrayal. Living after loss is not betrayal. Because our ancestors knew something about that. Black folk before us knew how to grieve and go. Oh, they buried those they loved, and they still raised their children. They mourned dreams deferred and still dreamed for generations they would never meet. They carried wounds they did not deserve and still left us prayers and songs and wisdom and institutions and strategies for survival and faith strong enough to get us to roads themselves would never live long enough to travel. We are here because they kept going. You think I'm raising an offering, but when I talk about you're sitting in a seat you didn't pay for. You're hearing an organ you didn't pay for. You're parking in a park. Your old church had 13 parking spaces. It had to burn to the ground. How would we have fit all these people in something with 13 parking spaces? But they're giving 180 years ago made room for you to drive your car in here and park it and walk in and take a seat. You gotta honor the sacrifices. You gotta carry the stories. You inherit the wisdom. And like the generations before us, sometimes we are called to go further despite the grief, despite how hard it is. Sometimes the greatest tribute you can give the people who brought you this far, hear me, is to keep going. I'm so sorry you lost baby boy, but he wants you to keep going. I'm so sorry she's not there next to you, but if you asked her right now, she'd want you to keep going. Take their prayers, take their wisdom, take their songs, take their lessons, take their love, and take your grief with you. Because the Bible never says God asked him to stop grieving in order to start going. You just cannot let what he has lost determine where he's allowed to go next. And maybe that's the word for somebody standing at a crossroads this morning. You don't have to leave your grief behind. Grief can come with you. Memories, can come with you. Love can come with you. Tears can come with you. But sometimes something else has to determine the direction, because God isn't simply asking Abram to leave what located him. God is offering Abram a new orientation toward what is still possible. Sometimes you got to preach what the text says, but sometimes you got to preach what it doesn't say. Notice what God does not say. God does not tell Abram, forget your brother. God does not tell Abram, forget your father. He doesn't say forget He doesn't say forget Haran. He doesn't say forget everything that happened. No, Abram, you can take all of that with you. And so can you. Your grief can come. Your memories can come. Your scars can come. Your questions can come. Your doubt can come. And your ancestors can watch over you, because moving forward does not require leaving behind everything that made you who you are. You just have to be careful about who you let give you direction. Because grief can travel with you. The problem is you just can't let it guide you. Grief can have a seat in the car, but grief cannot have control of the steering wheel of where we're going, because grief, hear me, help me, is an excellent historian. Grief can tell you what happened over and over and over again. Grief can tell you what hurt, where it hurt, when it hurt, and how it hurt. Grief can tell you what you lost. Grief can tell you what you missed. But grief is not always a reliable navigator. That's what I came to tell you. Grief cannot tell you where God is leading you. And if grief gets behind the wheel, eventually every decision becomes organized around preventing another loss. You stop loving because loving might hurt. You stop trusting because somebody betrayed you. You stop dreaming because one dream died. You stop building because something collapsed. You stop going because somebody you love couldn't go with you. And before long, you are no longer making decisions based on God's leading. You are making decisions based on what you are afraid might happen. So what's the solution? Let God do the driving. Grief can have a seat in the car, no problem, preferably in the back. And if grief is in the front seat, you give it you got a couple more weeks, months, maybe even a couple years in this front seat. But eventually, like a spoiled kid, you're going to get on my nerves and you're going to have to slide to the back. Because if God does the driving, grief doesn't have to disappear. You don't have to pretend it didn't hurt. I need you to hear that, because there are churches, oh my God, that when you've lost everything, and I hope you know me well enough, I'm not just talking about the physical losses and deaths of people, but when you've lost everything, they say, yes, weeping may endure for the night. I get that, but the joy ain't nowhere near the morning. Come on here. Because poor theology will help us to believe that it's all gonna be okay and you shouldn't have feels about what you're going through. God says you can feel it, but you still got to move forward. You don't have to erase what happened. You don't have to rush your healing. You don't have to stop crying. Grief simply loses the authority to determine the direction. And that's what I see happening with Abram. His country had oriented him. His kinfolk had anchored him. I'm about done. His father's house had sustained him. But now God says, in essence, let my voice orient your route. Leave what located you and trust God to orient you toward what is still possible. Oh, that's the route. Because the road is what brought you here. The route is what you discern from here. The road tells the story of where you have been, but the route says your story is not finished yet. There are still places you have not seen, still people you have not met, still love you have not experienced, still dreams you have not dreamed, still parts of yourself you have not met yet, still more life on the other side of what you lost. So no, you don't have to deny your grief. Just don't hand it the keys. Let grief ride. Let memory ride. Let everything you've survived ride. But listen for for the voice of God. Here it is. If you get nothing else this week, because on the long walk, the road gets you moving. Disruption gets you listening. Discernment gives you direction. And faith gets you going. Let me say it again. The road gets you moving. Disruption gets you listening. Discernment gives you direction, and faith gets you going. Beloved, you have been on the road long enough. It's time to trust God with the route. Genesis chapter 12, verse 4 gives us three simple words. So Abram left. That's it. God speaks, Abram listens. But don't misunderstand his leaving. Abram does not leave because every emotion has been resolved. He does not leave because he has finally gotten over his grief. He does not leave because he understands everything that happened behind him. And he certainly does not leave because God has given him a detailed itinerary for everything ahead of him. God says, go to a land I will show you, which means Abram starts walking before he knows exactly where the route will lead. He simply heard enough to take the next step. And beloved, sometimes that's all faith is, not certainty, not closure, not the absence of grief. Hear me, direction. Faith is hearing enough from God to take the next step, because Abram had to become somebody capable of hearing a word that could carry him beyond the limits of the life and the map he had inherited. And maybe that's where you are this morning. Maybe you're at a crossroads. Maybe life brought you here. Maybe grief brought you there. Maybe an ending brought you there. Maybe becoming brought you there. And maybe you've spent so much time looking back, trying to understand what happened, that you haven't been able to imagine what can still happen. But what if God is not asking you to understand everything? What if God is simply asking, can you hear me from here? Not can you explain everything, but can you hear me from here? Not are you finished grieving yet, but can you hear me from here? Not have you figured out the destination, but can you hear me? Not even do you know exactly how you're going to get there, just can you hear me from here? Because if you can still hear God, there is still direction. If you can still hear God, there is still possibility. If you can still hear God, there is still purpose. If you can still hear God, there is still more road. You can miss what you lost and still move. You can honor what was and still become. You can grieve what couldn't come with you and still go. You can carry yesterday without allowing yesterday to choose tomorrow. Because grief can travel with you. It just can't guide you. road brought you here, but beloved, the road does not get the final word. What happened to you doesn't get the final word. What left you doesn't get the final word, or who left you doesn't get the final word. What broke doesn't get the final word. What ended doesn't get the final word. God is still speaking, but you gotta listen. It's a still small voice that says there's still possibility. There's still places you haven't seen, still dreams you haven't dreamed. And I know you don't want to dream them without them by your side, but God says they're there in the spirit realm. There's still love you haven't experienced. And it ain't always got to be romantic love. It could just be God sends you somebody to know, I see you. There are parts of yourself you still haven't met yet. And there is still more of you to become. Because here's the good news. On the other side of Haran, there's still more road ahead. Haran doesn't have to be a dead end when it was meant to be a pass-through. So take your memories, take your lessons, take your scars, take your wisdom, take your tears, take your tissue, take your grief, and give God the keys. Because eventually every long walk with God reaches a road where nobody else can hear the next instruction except you. Mama can't hear it for you. I want to remind you again, Daddy can't hear it for you. Your friends can't hear it for you. Your pastor can't hear it for you. You have to hear God for yourself. And as I tell the young people, and then do what you hear God say do. And when you hear God say go, go. When God says move, you gotta move. When God says there is more, believe there is more, because you may not have the whole map. You may not understand the road that brought you here. You may not know everything waiting around the bend, but you have heard the voice of the one who knows the way. You know the one who has allowed boundary lines to fall in pleasant places. So you got to get up. You gotta take your next step. It don't have to be a big step. It just gotta be some step. You gotta keep walking. You gotta decide if you really want to be on the long walk or if you just want to stick to the lakes and the rivers that you're used to. But I came to tell you it's time to get on the route. I want to close with this. And this series is not about my divorce, but was a point of grief in my journey.